The forest was cloaked in darkness, a vast and endless expanse where time stretched thin. The tall pines stood like silent sentinels, their jagged branches swaying slightly under the weight of the wind. Leaves rustled softly, whispering secrets to one another as the night moved on in its slow, rhythmic passage. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, its voice cutting through the silence before fading once more into the void of soundless night. The bear lay nestled within the undergrowth, its massive body half buried beneath the thick layers of pine needles and earth. Its breathing was slow, steady, the great rise and fall of its chest barely disturbing the stillness around it. The scent of the forest surrounded it, the rich, loamy scent of damp soil, the sharp tang of evergreen, the faint musk of prey that had passed through these woods long before the bear had settled in. It was a night like any other, quiet and unbroken, the world untouched by anything beyond the trees. Then, something changed. A strange scent drifted into the bear's nostrils, curling around its senses with an unfamiliar sharpness. It was not the scent of prey, nor the familiar musk of another predator encroaching upon its territory. It was something else entirely, something bitter, acrid, unnatural. The bear's ears twitched as it inhaled again, sorting through the layers of scent, trying to understand. Smoke! The realization settled deep within the bear's instincts, awakening something primal and old. Smoke was not something of the forest, not something that belonged to the quiet rhythms of trees and wind. Smoke was dangerous. Smoke meant fire. The bear lifted its head, blinking slowly, its dark eyes scanning the night. The world around it had not changed. The trees stood as they always had, their silhouettes stretching toward the sky, their trunks solid and unmoving. But something was different. A faint glow, barely noticeable at first, flickered through the gaps in the branches, pulsing like a dying ember against the vast blackness beyond. The bear shifted, its muscles tensing beneath thick fur. Fire. It had seen fire before. Once, seasons ago, when the sky had cracked open with lightning and the trees had burned, the bear had watched from afar as the flames devoured everything in their path. It had seen the way the fire moved, not like a beast with claws and fangs, but like a living hunger, consuming, spreading, leaving only blackened skeletons of trees in its wake. This fire was different. The glow did not stretch across the sky, did not dance along the treetops in a wave of destruction. It was contained, held in one place, its light pulsing like a heartbeat against the darkness. The scent of smoke grew stronger, carried on the shifting wind, mingling with the crisp air of the night. The bear inhaled deeply. Beneath the heavy stench of burning wood, there was something else. Something faint, something almost lost beneath the overwhelming presence of fire. It was the scent of the creatures beyond the forest, the ones who walked on two legs, the ones who built dens of wood and stone, who left behind strange scents, who carried metal that shined in the sun. The ones the bear had learned to avoid, for they were unpredictable, dangerous, unlike any other creature in the woods. The fire belonged to them. The bear remained still, its powerful body tense, its instincts urging it to turn away, to retreat deeper into the forest where the fire could not reach. But something held it there, watching. The glow flickered brighter, the flames licking hungrily at the sky. Embers drifted upward, swirling in the night like fireflies caught in an unseen current. The sound of burning wood cracked through the air, sharp and violent, sending echoes rolling through the trees. The fire was growing. The bear could see it now, could see the way the flames consumed, could feel the heat pressing against the night, warping the air around it. The forest, so silent before, now seemed to hum with tension, as if the trees themselves could sense what was happening, as if the earth beneath the bear's paws trembled in the presence of the flames. A deep rumble built in the bear's chest, not quite a growl, not quite a sound at all, but something deeper, something ancient. The fire did not belong here. It did not belong in the quiet rhythm of the trees, did not belong in the world of shadow and scent. It was something else entirely, something foreign, something destructive, something that the bear could not fight, could not challenge. The wind shifted, carrying another gust of smoke through the air, thick and choking. The bear's ears twitched as the flames crackled louder, the fire consuming more, climbing higher, devouring the wooden structure that stood in its path. It was a sight unlike anything the bear had seen before. The fire moved, alive in its hunger, twisting and writhing as it reached for more, as it spread across the wooden den, turning its walls to blackened ash. The heat rolled off it in waves, distorting the air, making the night shimmer with an unnatural glow. The bear did not move. The forest did not move. Only the fire moved, growing, consuming, destroying. The bear's breath was slow, steady, deep. Its instincts screamed for it to turn away, to flee, to leave this place behind before the fire grew too close, before the smoke became too thick. And yet it did not. Something held it there, watching, waiting. The fire would take what it wanted. It always did. And the bear, a creature of the forest, of the earth, of the quiet rhythms of the wild, could do nothing but bear witness to its hunger. The wind howled through the trees, and the fire burned. The bear watched, and the night went on. The night was alive with the chaotic fury of fire, its golden tongue stretching hungrily toward the sky, devouring the wooden structure that once stood proud and strong. The thick scent of burning timber clogged the air, turning the forest's familiar earthiness into something foreign and hostile. The bear, a creature of instinct and experience, knew fire. It had watched it from afar, seen how it danced and consumed, how it took without remorse, leaving only skeletal remains in its wake. Fire was not something to challenge, not something to fight. It was a force of nature, just as unstoppable as the rivers that carved through rock or the storms that tore trees from the earth. And yet, through the endless roar of crackling wood and the ceaseless rise of smoke curling into the sky like ghostly fingers, a sound pierced the night, something fragile, something pleading, something that did not belong to the fire's hunger. A cry. It was faint at first, almost lost beneath the howling wind and the violent destruction unfolding before the bear's dark eyes. But then it came again, higher, desperate, fragile, yet defiant against the suffocating heat and raging destruction. It was the cry of a baby, trapped within the burning ruin, swallowed by the inferno that showed no mercy. The bear's ears twitched, its massive body stiffening as the sound wove itself into the very fabric of its being. It was unlike any call it had ever heard. Not the distressed bleating of a wounded fawn, not the shrill alarm of a bird warning of danger, not the final whimpers of prey caught in a predator's grasp. This was different. It was small. It was helpless. And it was fading. Smoke coiled around the bear like a living thing, pressing against its thick fur, wrapping it in a heat that pulsed and suffocated. The air shimmered, warping under the intensity of the flames that devoured everything in their path. The wooden structure trembled, its walls weakened by the relentless assault of fire, the very bones of the place giving way with sharp, splintering cracks. The fire was winning. It always won. And yet, that cry, so fragile, so lost, had not yet been silenced. It clawed through the fire's rage, defying the destruction, refusing to disappear into the abyss of smoldering ruin. The bear shifted its weight, powerful muscles coiling beneath its dense fur. Every instinct screamed for it to turn away, to retreat into the safety of the darkened woods where the fire's reach could not follow, where the ancient rhythm of the forest continued, undisturbed by the chaos of the human world. It had always avoided them, the creatures that built their strange dens, the ones who carried the scent of metal and sweat, the ones who feared the wild even as they sought to tame it. But this was not a hunter's cry. This was not the sound of a creature that knew its place in the order of things. This was something much smaller, much more vulnerable. And though the bear did not understand the world beyond the trees, beyond the rivers, beyond the cycle of life and death it had always known, something deep within it stirred. The fire crackled violently, another section of the roof collapsing in on itself, sending a storm of embers into the sky like stars breaking apart. The walls groaned, trembling beneath their own weight, the very foundation of the place splintering as the flames consumed without pause. The bear took a step forward, then another, each massive paw pressing into the scorched earth. The heat clawed at its thick fur, the edges of its body illuminated by the flickering glow, turning its dark form into something monstrous, something otherworldly. The fire roared in defiance, lashing outward, sending waves of searing heat against the creature that dared to challenge its claim. But the bear did not stop. Smoke burned in its lungs, each breath thick with the acrid scent of destruction. But still, it moved. The world blurred, turned into nothing but shifting gold and black, the fire consuming all that it touched, but the cry still rang in its ears, though weaker now, slipping further into the abyss of silence. The bear pressed forward, navigating the crumbling ruin with a strength that defied the chaos around it. The flames snarled, the heat intensified, the wooden remains of the structure threatened to collapse entirely. But then, through the thick haze of smoke and ruin, the bear saw it. A bundle, small and trembling, caught between the wreckage, its tiny limbs barely moving as the fire crept ever closer. The bear lunged, its powerful jaws closing around the fabric, careful, controlled, an instinct it did not fully understand guiding it now. The scent was strange, so different from anything it had ever known, a mixture of human, of fear, of smoke and sweat, and something faintly sweet beneath it all. The bundle whimpered, a weak, exhausted sound, but it was there. It was still alive. The fire protested with a furious crack, a final attempt to claim what it had nearly taken, but the bear did not hesitate. Its muscles bunched, and with a single, mighty push, it surged forward, leaping through the remains of the collapsing structure just as the walls gave way behind it. The air exploded with a deafening roar, the last of the house crumbling into a heap of embers and ruin, sending waves of heat rolling outward. The fire had won. It had taken what it could, but not this. The bear did not stop. It ran, away from the flames, away from the choking smoke, away from the destruction that had nearly swallowed them whole. The forest welcomed them with open arms, its cool darkness wrapping around them, soothing the burn of heat and ash, carrying them far from the ruin left behind. The night pulsed with a quiet rhythm once more, the sounds of the wild returning, cautious but steady, as if the fire had never reached this deep. The baby whimpered again, the sound barely audible, but the bear felt it, the trembling weight between its jaws, the fragile life it had taken from the clutches of destruction. The fire had taken much, but not everything, not tonight. And so, in the depths of the wilderness, where the trees stretched high and the earth remained untouched by the hands of those who built and destroyed, the bear stood, watching, waiting. The night stretched on, and the baby, alive, small, trembling, breathed. And for the first time, the bear did not turn away. The fire raged in the night, a living beast of destruction, its golden tongues wrapping around the collapsing structure, consuming wood, cloth, and stone with equal hunger. Smoke billowed into the air, thick and choking, turning the sky above into a swirling abyss of black and red. The inferno roared like an angry storm, swallowing the world in its merciless grasp. The bear stood at the edge of the chaos, its massive form illuminated by the flickering glow, fur bristling with heat, muscles tense beneath its thick hide. The scent of burning wood, of ash and charred earth, filled its lungs, stinging its senses, warning it of the danger ahead. But beyond the suffocating smoke, beyond the collapsing ruin, beyond the reach of the fire's grasp, something else remained, a sound, faint and weak, trembling on the edge of silence. The child. The bear did not understand why it had not turned away, why it had not left this place behind, as instinct demanded. It was not a creature of the human world. It did not belong to the villages, to the wooden dens, to the strange beings that built and destroyed with equal recklessness. But the cry had reached something deep within it, something primal, something that defied the cold logic of survival. The fire had taken almost everything, yet this small, fragile thing still fought against it. And the bear, against everything it knew, would not let it be taken. With a powerful push, the bear surged forward, its great paws striking the scorched earth, sending up clouds of ash as it entered the burning wreckage. The heat closed in around it immediately, pressing against its thick fur, curling through its limbs like invisible chains trying to drag it back. The wooden walls groaned, their foundations breaking apart, snapping like brittle bones as flames carved their way through the structure. The fire lashed outward, hungry and furious, sending waves of heat that distorted the air, turning the world into a vision of shimmering gold and black. The bear pressed on. Smoke stung its eyes, reducing its world to shifting shadows and fleeting glimpses of fire-lit ruin. The air was thick, poisoned by burning debris, making every breath a struggle. But the bear pushed forward, its instincts screaming against the madness of what it was doing. It moved with a hunter's precision, its body weaving through the wreckage, dodging the falling beams, the crumbling walls, the hungry tongues of flame that sought to devour everything in their path. Each step was met with the crack of wood splintering beneath its weight, with the groan of a dying structure giving in to the fire's relentless advance. But then, through the chaos, through the suffocating heat and swirling ash, it saw it, the small, trembling shape, barely visible through the haze of destruction. The child. It was curled in on itself, trapped beneath a fallen beam, its tiny hands clutching at nothing, its breath shallow, barely rising in the thick air. The fire was closing in, the last remnants of the house collapsing in on itself, threatening to bury the child beneath an avalanche of burning debris. The bear did not hesitate. With a mighty swipe of its massive paw, it struck the smoldering beam aside, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The ground beneath it shuddered, the entire structure threatening to come down in one final, devastating collapse. There was no time. Lowering its head, the bear opened its powerful jaws, carefully closing them around the fabric of the child's clothing, lifting the tiny body with a precision that no beast of its size should have possessed. The child whimpered, a weak sound, barely more than a breath, but it was alive. That was all that mattered. The fire screamed in protest as the bear turned, the heat surging in one final attempt to claim what it had nearly taken. The house was falling, its remains no longer able to withstand the onslaught of flames. The roof gave way, crashing downward in a cascade of fiery ruin. The bear moved. It leaped forward, muscles coiling, paws striking the ground with enough force to send embers scattering. The world behind it collapsed, the last remnants of the structure crumbling into an unrecognizable heap of smoldering ruin. Smoke billowed outward in thick, rolling clouds, the fire's final roar echoing into the night. But the bear did not look back. It ran, through the burning wreckage, through the heat and ruin, through the thick night air that still trembled with the fire's rage. The forest was close, its towering trees standing like silent guardians, their branches stretching into the sky, untouched by the destruction that had nearly claimed everything. The cool scent of pine and earth replaced the choking burn of smoke, the air shifting, cleansing, as if the fire's reach had been severed at the tree line. The bear slowed, its breath heavy, its massive body slick with sweat and ash. It carried the child gently, carefully, its powerful jaws holding it with a tenderness that defied the very nature of the beast. The forest stretched around them, endless and dark, a world untouched by the chaos they had left behind. The fire was gone now, its glow reduced to a distant flicker against the horizon. The night had reclaimed its silence. The bear lowered its head, placing the child onto the soft earth. It was so small, so fragile, its tiny body rising and falling with each shallow breath. It did not move, did not cry out, but it was alive. That was enough. The bear stood over it, watching, waiting. The forest whispered around them, the wind carrying the distant scent of rain, the first promise of healing after the night's destruction. The trees swayed, their branches shifting in the moonlight, as if acknowledging what had just transpired, as if bearing witness to something that did not belong to the world of beasts or men. The child stirred. A faint, broken whimper escaped its lips, the smallest sound, but it was enough to shatter the unbearable quiet. The bear did not move. It had defied the fire. It had walked through ruin, had felt the flames claw at its fur, had faced the fury of something that could not be fought. And yet, here it stood unbroken, the weight of its impossible actions settling into the very marrow of its being. The fire had taken much, but not this. The night stretched on, the forest breathing in its slow, ancient rhythm, carrying away the last echoes of the fire's rage. The bear remained still, watching over the tiny life it had pulled from the jaws of destruction. It did not know why it had done it. It did not understand the force that had driven it into the inferno, that had pushed it through the searing pain, through the madness, through the very thing it had always been meant to fear. But as the child took another breath, stronger this time, as the wind carried away the last traces of smoke, as the forest wrapped them in its quiet, unshaken embrace, the bear knew one thing with certainty. Tonight, the fire had lost, and the child would live. The night hung heavy over the forest, thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth, the last echoes of destruction fading into the silence. The fire had lost its fury, reduced to a distant glow on the horizon, a dying ember in the vast darkness of the wilderness. The trees stood untouched, their towering forms swaying gently in the cool night breeze, as if the disaster had never reached them, as if the ruin of man's creation was nothing more than a passing shadow in the rhythm of the earth. And in the heart of the forest, beneath the endless stretch of stars, the bear stood. Its massive body was still, its dark fur illuminated by the soft silver glow of the moon, a stark contrast to the chaos it had left behind. Ash clung to its thick coat, its paws blackened from the smoldering remains of the fire. But it did not move, did not turn away. It stood watch over the small, fragile bundle lying in the grass before it. The child, tiny and trembling, let out a weak whimper, its breath shallow but steady. It had survived. Against all odds, against the fire's relentless hunger, against the destruction that had threatened to claim everything, it had survived. And now, in the silence of the forest, it lay beneath the watchful eyes of the creature that had pulled it from the jaws of death. The bear did not understand the weight of what it had done, did not know the meaning behind the silent miracle that had unfolded in the depths of the night. It only knew that the fire had tried to take this small thing, and it had not allowed it. It knew that the child was alive, that its breath still shuddered in the cool air, that its scent, though tinged with smoke and fear, was still warm. It was not prey. It was not threat. It simply was, and the bear, though it did not know why, remained by its side. The village was waking. Beyond the trees, beyond the safety of the forest's embrace, the people stirred. They had seen the fire, had watched in horror as the inferno swallowed one of their own. They had heard the desperate cries, the roaring collapse, the merciless fury of destruction taking hold of their world. And now, in the aftermath, they emerged hesitant, afraid, their voices hushed and uncertain. Boots crunched against the scorched earth, hurried footsteps cutting through the remnants of smoke still curling in the air. The villagers carried torches, their flickering light trembling against the darkness, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. They moved as one, drawn by the whispers of something impossible, by the murmurs of a presence in the forest, something that defied the natural order of things. Then they saw it. At first, the scene did not register, did not make sense in the broken remains of logic that lingered after the night's chaos. A bear, a great, hulking beast, its body coated in ash and soot, standing in the clearing, unmoving, silent. But then their eyes fell upon what lay before it. The child, small, frail, alive. A stunned silence fell over the villagers, the weight of disbelief pressing against their chests. Their minds fought to grasp the impossible, to understand what they were seeing. It did not fit into the world they knew, the world where beasts and men were separate, where fire consumed without mercy, where nature followed its brutal, unyielding laws. The bear should not have been here. And yet it was. A murmur rippled through the group, hushed voices barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would break whatever strange, fragile thing had taken shape in this moment. Some took hesitant steps forward, others held back, their hands gripping their torches tighter, the primal fear of the wild still woven deep into their bones. The bear did not move. It simply stood, watching, its massive form still as stone, its dark eyes locked onto the people who now surrounded it. There was no aggression in its stance, no challenge in the way it held itself. And yet, something in its presence sent a shudder through the gathered crowd, something that made them hesitate, made them question everything they had ever known about creatures like this. The child stirred. A small, broken whimper escaped its lips, barely more than a breath, but it was enough to send a ripple of urgency through the villagers. One of the women gasped, a choked sound of relief and disbelief. Another took a step forward, her hands trembling, reaching toward the child as if afraid that the moment would shatter like glass beneath her fingers. The bear let out a low, rumbling breath. It was not a growl, not a warning, but something deeper, something ancient, something that carried the weight of something beyond words. And then slowly it stepped back. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, a silent acknowledgement of what was happening. It had done what it had come to do. The fire had not taken this life. The child was no longer its burden. The villagers did not move as the great beast turned, its powerful muscles shifting beneath its ash-streaked fur. It walked with the steady, unshaken gait of something that knew no fear, something that did not belong to the world of men. The trees opened before it, the shadows swallowing its form, and within moments, it was gone, disappearing into the vast, endless depths of the forest. Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating, the weight of what had just transpired settling over the gathered crowd like a heavy fog. The child cried out, a soft, weak sound, but alive, undeniably alive. And in that moment, the spell was broken. The villagers surged forward, hands reaching, voices rising in a chaotic symphony of relief and disbelief. The mother, tears streaming down her face, collapsed to her knees, clutching the child to her chest, whispering words of gratitude, of sorrow, of things she could not understand. Others gathered around, their hands hovering, touching, making sure that what they were seeing was real, that the child was truly there, truly breathing, truly safe. The murmurs grew louder, shifting from stunned disbelief to hurried, desperate explanations, to frantic attempts to piece together something that could never truly make sense. A bear, someone whispered. It was just standing there, watching. It saved the child. The words felt strange, foreign, impossible. And yet, there was no denying what they had seen. The child was alive. The fire had taken everything. And yet somehow, impossibly, this one small life had been spared. And the creature that had pulled it from the inferno, the beast that should have been nothing but a thread in the darkness, had stood guard over it, had waited, had watched, had left only when it was certain the child was safe. No one spoke of hunting the bear. No one reached for their weapons. No one dared to disturb the path it had taken back into the depths of the wild. The fire had destroyed, had devoured, had nearly taken something precious. But tonight it had lost, and the villagers, still trembling, still struggling to grasp the impossible, could do nothing but stare into the darkened trees, where somewhere, unseen and unheard, the bear walked on, disappearing into the endless night. The night air was still thick with the acrid scent of smoke, a lingering reminder of the devastation that had nearly consumed everything. The villagers, still shaken by what they had witnessed, gathered in the clearing, their eyes locked onto the fragile life cradled in its mother's arms. The child was small, wrapped in the remnants of its scorched blanket, its skin smudged with soot and ash, but its chest rose and fell with each soft, trembling breath. The fire had taken everything, reduced a home to nothing but cinders and ruin, but somehow, against all odds, this one precious life had survived. and the one who had saved it was gone, swallowed by the dark embrace of the forest, vanishing as if it had never been there at all. The villagers did not speak of what they had seen, not yet. The impossible truth of it lingered in their minds, twisting itself into something they could not yet name. A bear had stood over the child, had watched over it like a silent guardian, had done what no man had dared. It had defied fire, braved the suffocating heat, walked through the ruins of destruction, and emerged victorious. It had saved a child from death. But bears did not do such things. Beasts did not behave that way. The world had its laws, its rules, its unbreakable order. And yet, the truth stood before them, breathing, alive, undeniable. A baby had been saved by a monster. And now, the world had to make sense of it. The first to move was the child's mother. Her hands shook as she brushed away the soot from the infant's soft cheek, her fingers trembling over the delicate rise and fall of its chest. She let out a choked sob, pressing the baby against her, as if afraid it would disappear if she loosened her grip even slightly. The others watched in silence, their faces unreadable, caught between the overwhelming relief of a miracle and the terror of what had made it possible. Then came the sound of horses, of hurried footsteps, of voices calling out in the distance. The village doctor had arrived. The crowd parted as the man, old and weathered, with hands that had seen too much suffering and yet still carried the weight of responsibility, rushed forward. His eyes darted between the mother and the child, widening as he took in the sight before him. He had expected the worst. A burned, lifeless body pulled from the wreckage, another name to be whispered in grief by morning. But instead he saw a child alive, weak but alive, and that was something he had not expected at all. "Give her to me," the doctor said, his voice careful, measured, almost as if he feared speaking too loudly would wake him from whatever strange dream he had stumbled into. The mother hesitated for only a moment before gently placing the baby into his waiting arms. The villagers held their breath as the old man lowered his ear to the child's chest, listening, feeling, searching for something only he would understand. Time stretched thin, the air growing heavy with anticipation, with fear. Then, "She's unharmed." The words fell over them like rain after a long drought, like a flood breaking through the dam of uncertainty that had held them captive. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, the tension shattering in an instant. The mother collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands covering her face as the weight of the moment consumed her. Relief, disbelief, gratitude, it all poured from her in great, shaking breaths. The doctor turned the child gently in his hands, examining her more closely. Her small face was streaked with ash, her tiny hands curled into weak fists against the cool night air. She whimpered softly, but did not cry, did not struggle. She was exhausted. Her body had fought through hell, had endured the heat, the smoke, the fear. But she was whole. Not a single burn marked her delicate skin. It was impossible. The doctor looked up at the gathered villagers, at the faces still frozen in a mixture of awe and confusion. "She should not have survived that," he murmured, as much to himself as to the others. Not without a single wound. No one responded. They didn't need to, because they all knew. The bear, the memory of its massive form standing in the clearing, silent, unmoving, watching over the child like something ancient and unknowable, would never leave them. It had been more than an animal in that moment, more than just a beast of the forest. It had become something else entirely, a force beyond understanding, a savior born from the wild. And now it was gone, somewhere in the darkness, beyond the reach of their torches, beyond the limits of their world. It walked on. The forest had reclaimed it, taken it back into its depths where no human could follow. It had done what it came to do. The fire had been challenged, and for the first time, it had lost. The villagers lingered for a long time, their whispers blending with the rustling wind that moved through the trees. Some searched the darkness, hoping to catch one final glimpse of the creature that had rewritten everything they believed. Others looked at the child, struggling to comprehend the impossible truth that lay before them. But no one spoke of hunting the bear. No one whispered of fear or of vengeance. It had done what no man had been able to do. And for that, it had earned something that no beast had ever earned before: respect. The doctor carried the child toward the waiting carriage, his hands steady despite the storm of thoughts raging in his mind. He would take her to the village infirmary, would watch over her through the night, would ensure that no hidden harm lingered beneath her skin. But deep down, he already knew she would be fine. The bear had saved her, and somehow, that meant she would be fine. The villagers slowly began to disperse, their faces still carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. The mother, wiping away her tears, followed closely behind, unable to take her eyes off the child even for a second. She did not care what had saved her daughter. She did not care if it had been a bear, a miracle, or something beyond her understanding. All that mattered was that her baby was alive. And so, as the torches dimmed and the voices faded, the night reclaimed its silence. Deep within the forest, unseen and unheard, the bear walked on. Its massive paws pressed into the cool earth, its breath slow and steady, its body aching from the heat and exhaustion of the night's battle. It did not know what it had done. It did not understand the weight of the impossible thing that had unfolded. It only knew that the fire had tried to take something, and it had stopped it. That was all. The trees closed around it, the darkness swallowing its form, carrying it back into the only world it had ever known. The world of the wild. The world where fire was an enemy, where humans were distant, where beasts were beasts and nothing more. But tonight, for the first time, that world had changed. And though the bear did not know it, did not understand the whispers it had left behind, did not comprehend the way the villagers would speak of it for generations to come, one thing remained certain. A life had been saved, and the bear, once nothing more than a shadow in the night, had become a legend. And with that, it disappeared, leaving behind only footprints in the earth, the fading scent of smoke in its fur, and the memory of something no one would ever forget. The village had barely begun to recover from the night of fire and miracles when the truth started to surface, crawling out from the ashes like something diseased and rotten. The child, safe and unharmed, had become a symbol of something greater, a living testament to the impossible, a baby snatched from the jaws of death, not by the hands of men, but by the claws of a beast. The villagers still whispered about the bear, still spoke of the moment they had stumbled into that clearing and seen it standing there, silent, watchful, as if guarding something sacred. It had left an imprint on their souls, something they could not shake, something that unsettled them even in their prayers. But the fire itself, the destruction, the horror of that night, those things had to be understood. There had to be a reason, an answer, something tangible they could point to. And so, the investigation began. The charred remains of the house still smoldered when the village elders gathered, sifting through the wreckage with careful steps, their faces grim beneath the rising morning sun. The air was still thick with the scent of burnt wood and sorrow, the ground blackened and broken beneath their boots. There was no saving what had stood here. Only ghosts remained, clinging to the ruins, whispering their secrets in the wind. The men worked in silence, overturning fragments of collapsed walls, shifting through the debris, searching for anything that might explain how the fire had started. And then they found it, a bottle. It lay half buried in the soot, its glass blackened but unbroken, the label still visible beneath the layer of ash. Cheap liquor, the kind that burned more than it satisfied, the kind that left men dull-eyed and stumbling, their thoughts blurred, their hands clumsy. Nearby, more bottles, some shattered, some whole, scattered among the remains of what had once been a table, now reduced to nothing more than charred splinters. And beside them, the final piece of the puzzle, a cigarette, its filter half melted, the tobacco inside long turned to dust. It had been left there, forgotten, smoldering against the dry wood of the floor, a tiny ember that had grown into an unstoppable force. The elders exchanged looks, the truth settling over them like a sickness. This had not been an accident. This had been negligence. The parents had done this. The truth spread quickly, infecting the village like wildfire, burning through any last remnants of doubt. The mother and father of the child, who should have protected her, who should have been the ones to pull her from the flames, had been the ones who lit the match, too lost in their drunken stupor to notice the destruction they had set in motion. They had fallen asleep, bodies heavy with liquor, oblivious to the smoke curling beneath the door, to the flames licking at the wooden walls, to the cries of their own child as the fire swallowed everything around her. And while they had escaped, stumbling out into the night, coughing and heaving, they had left their daughter behind, left her to burn. The revelation sent a wave of anger rippling through the village. People gathered in small clusters, their voices low, sharp, filled with rage and disgust. How could they? How could any parent drink themselves into oblivion while their child lay helpless in the next room? How could they let a fire take hold without even waking, without feeling the heat creeping toward them, without hearing the crackling destruction of their own home? And worst of all, how could they abandon their own flesh and blood, leave her behind while they staggered to safety, too dazed, too self-consumed to think of anyone but themselves? Had the bear not intervened, had that strange, impossible act of salvation not occurred, the child would be nothing but ash now. The mother had not spoken since the fire. She sat on the steps of the village infirmary, her clothes still reeking of smoke, her hair tangled, her face hollow. Her eyes were red from crying, but she did not weep anymore. There were no tears left to shed. She had burned through them just as the fire had burned through her home, leaving nothing but empty ruin behind. When the elders confronted her, when they placed the bottle and the cigarette at her feet, when they demanded to know what had happened, she did not try to deny it. She only nodded, a small, broken movement, and then she whispered, "I didn't wake up." It was the only defense she could offer. Her husband was less composed. He raged at the accusations, his face red with shame and fury, spitting excuses, blaming the fire, the wood, the wind, anything but himself. He hadn't meant to. He had been exhausted. It was just one drink. He hadn't known. Words that rang hollow in the ears of the villagers who had stood in that clearing, who had seen the bear, who had witnessed the truth with their own eyes. "You left her," someone said, a sharp voice cutting through his rambling. "You got out." "She didn't." The words hit harder than any fist could. The man fell silent, his breath shallow, his hands shaking at his sides. The village had its justice, its ways of dealing with those who failed their own. Punishments were not taken lightly, and the anger of the people was not easily soothed. There would be consequences. Whether it was exile, whether it was shame, whether it was something worse, the village would decide. But in the end, none of it would change what had already happened. The fire had come, and it had nearly claimed a child because of them. And a bear, an animal, a creature they had always feared, always hunted, always seen as nothing more than a beast, had done what no one else had. It had saved her. The villagers could not forget that. No matter how much they tried to explain it, no matter how many times they turned the events over in their minds, trying to place reason where reason had no place, they could not deny what had happened. The fire had almost won. The parents had led it, and the bear had stopped it. Far beyond the reach of the village, deep within the endless stretch of trees, the creature walked on, unbothered by the turmoil left in its wake. It did not know what had been uncovered, did not understand the weight of the truth now pressing down on the people it had saved. It did not care. The forest was all that mattered. The scent of pine and damp earth filled its lungs, washing away the last remnants of smoke clinging to its fur. The night stretched ahead, vast and empty, unbroken by the ruins of man's failures. It had done what it had come to do, had answered a call it did not understand, had left behind something that was not its concern. The world of men was not the world of beasts. And yet, for a single night, those worlds had crossed, and something neither side could explain had taken place. The bear disappeared into the darkness, its heavy steps silent against the soft earth, vanishing like a shadow into the heart of the wild. And in the village, among the broken remains of a home that would never stand again, the people stood together, left to face the truth that the fire had revealed, not just about the ones who had caused it, but about themselves, and about the beast that had saved what they had nearly lost.